Hey everyone, I'm Tom Lawry. I'm the National Director for Artificial Intelligence for Health and Life Sciences at Microsoft. Welcome to the Top Trends in Healthcare video series. This is where we're looking at trends shaping the future of healthcare. I get excited every time I have the opportunity to spend time with our guest. Gil Bashe is the Chair of Global Health and Purpose at Finn Partners. He's got a long history of influencing healthcare, starting as a combat medic. He also served as government affairs leader for a very large global not-for-profit doing drug development and environmental health. He's been a health lobbyist. Gil, there's so many other things. I could take the next 10 minutes just to tell people about your background. But anyway, it's great to be with you again.
I'm thrilled to be in conversation with you about this topic. We have probably in the United States an unusual health system, probably one of the most fragmented in the world. We spend 20% of GDP on health. And that's about twice as much as most nations, developed nations in the world spend. And yet we have as much as 10 years less life expectancy. So we're spending a lot. We're certainly committed to spending a lot. We're not living longer. What's the rub here? What's the fragmentation and problems that we face? I think that we're going to explore that in this brief conversation today.
So the question really is, and I appreciate your take, why is it that we spend the most but get the least when it comes to health measures that everyone looks at?
I'm going to summarize the potential shifts of why with three words: behavior, interoperability, and policy. And those three words really are rooted back to the genesis of the modern health system here in the United States. The developed world really has a post-World War II health system that was created on the disaster of a world war. And what happened was, in Europe, that was profoundly changed by the war. They really needed to create a system that was essentially guided by their governments. They created a universal healthcare system. And as a result of that, they had policies in place that would touch on how people access care and how information was organized. The United States actually had a much more freewheeling entrepreneurial system that essentially encouraged the physicians and the health providers and the payers sort of all to create mini systems. None of the systems actually interacted with each other. And that was the beginning of a foundation of a system that has multiple players and more intermediaries. But there's one thing that you and I both know that we care deeply about. These players actually aren't working from the same deck of information. The information siloed in many cases. And so when you have a behavioral culture of siloed information, what tends to happen is that we don't seek to shift that in terms of accessible information, applicable information. We just keep on generating more information. And so that more information hasn't brought us closer together. It's separated us and in some ways created, I'd say, a nation of information anxiety. So we have to figure a way through that.
Great points. It's interesting to me where I have the opportunity to work with a lot of health leaders, and there are times where they've read an article or maybe they've been to a conference presentation. And one of the things making the rounds right now is leaders saying information's the new currency in healthcare. During the pandemic, one of the good things about the pandemic is it kind of pulled forward the whole concept of social determinants of health. And it's interesting to me, and I'd love to get your take, where we're spending a lot of time talking about that, but I'm not sure how much we're actually using it. And I always also like to throw out the question you and I have talked about is, which is a better predictor of health, one's genetic code or their zip code?
Quick answer: zip code, exclamation point. And actually we know that, Tom, there are places in the world we call blue zones. And in these blue zones, people are living, believe it or not, 100 years plus. Now, we have to say, wow. Now, what's fascinating about these blue zones is they're not spending a ton of money on modern healthcare. They're looking at actually behavioral elements of health, the right diet, the right exercise, community, which has been so negatively impacted by the COVID pandemic and isolation and quarantine. So we have a sense that genetics plays a big role in this, but genetics is influenced by other aspects of this. Connecting this to something you and I care passionately about, which is what's the role of information in sort of looking at this longitudinally? Well, navigation, information essentially is historic. We don't have future information. We have information we've collected. It's past information. But the past is not necessarily an indicator of the future. It's a guide to help us understand what we're facing, what we have to really prioritize. So there's a saying, when you don't know where you want to go, any road will take you there. And the fact is, information helps us chart that highway. Now we're using information, though, to take a look at, okay, we have great innovation. We don't lack innovation when it comes to biomedical science. What we do lack is great indication of who needs it. In other words, it's not information, it's application of the information. And so I think we have to find that we have to break open the silos of information.
I'm going to shift gears and I'm going to introduce a topic that I kind of like to talk about, AI. So as we're talking about data, AI needs, feeds, and thrives on data. It's the only way that any of the components of AI work. And, as you know, it's been a very popular topic in healthcare around the world the past few years. Some see it as a game changer. Some see it as just kind of another overhyped technology that eventually something else will come along to be hyped instead of AI. So I'd appreciate getting your take on the value of AI and where you see it taking us, even in the next few years.
Yeah. You're right. First, we talked about big data. Then we talked about machine learning. Now we talk about AI. They're all variations of the same concept. It is a game changer. And in this country, we kind of scratch our heads and say, how do we deploy it? But let me give you an example where artificial intelligence, or augmented intelligence is probably a better term, or sort of data analyzed for its nuggets, its gold, its currency, is making a big difference in the world. So you take countries that have closed loop health systems like Israel or Germany, for instance, where they're using AI extensively. And guess what? They're producing extraordinary results. They're engaging populations most at risk. They're moving forward to ensure vaccination is made available. All that. They're looking at people who are at risk for colon cancer. And instead of waiting for every 5 years to do a colonoscopy, they're realizing maybe these people, to sustain their life healthfully, need more frequent colonoscopies. AI unlocks all of that possibility.
My last book, Hacking Healthcare, starts with the premise of there was really good news, all the things we learned with the onset of a global pandemic. And the things we learned included, everyone saw that health systems, which are normally kind of known for moving at glacial speed, have the ability to move at warp speed when properly motivated, and we have a big challenge to face. Two, we found that innovative leaders were willing to step up, make changes, sometimes dramatic changes quickly, to the old ways in which they worked. As you look ahead, and I love what you've talked about today, what do you see as the best possibilities and opportunities? And then what do you see as the obstacles that everyone needs to pay attention to?
Necessity is the mother of invention, that old expression. And certainly at the height of COVID, we needed to deploy faster. The whole program was called Operation Warp Speed. What I see to some extent is a slip back to old patterns. And so you ask, what do we need to change? Well, one, the incentives. The incentives were high during Operation Warp Speed, during the height of the COVID pandemic. And so we were incentivized as a society to mine information super fast, to come up with answers faster than ever before. That's one. Two, we need to reward people, not incentivize, reward them for learning how to deploy AI differently. We need to actually have a series of what we call the moonshots, but we have to understand that actually sharing data, which is different than our current system. Sharing data is a game changer. And right now, many of our academic medical systems actually want to withhold data. Well, the challenge is that when you have great institutions that aren't willing to share their data, Well, it slows the pace of innovation, and slowing the pace of innovation slows the pace of solutions that can sustain and save people's lives. So, what do we need to do? Change the incentives, change the mindset, demonstrate what the power of being part of a life-saving system can be, and understand that AI is not a sort of a new sort of like buzzword. It is actually the pathway.
Gil, I can't imagine a better way of ending this segment than what you just said. And I can't thank you enough. I always enjoy the opportunity to talk with you. It's always enlightening and really gives me a lot to think about. And I'm sure you've given others the same opportunity.
Tom, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you'll come back for another episode of Top Trends in Healthcare video series.